Okay, one there. John?
I really enjoyed the presentation, Susan. I wanted to ask a question about the sort of production of what goes into news. You made a very nice point about Filipino bias getting more extreme. But having witnessed the way in which the music industry captured the intellectual property debate in Europe and got copyright extension extended from 50 to 75 years, when there was zero argument that anything was being produced that was useful. I just wonder if part of that applies to news. So there must be an awful lot of news. Your peak on Princess Christina. It's not obvious to me that the newspapers are producing a lot when they produce news about Princess Christina. It's produced by her or by the courts. Other news is produced by companies. You know, lots of people are pushing news out. Celebrities are pushing news out. So we should be concerned with presumably investigative journalism, querying of things and so forth. But I would contend that there may be a much narrower base of content that is really, really valuable. And I'm just wondering what percentage of everything that newspapers traditionally did has done that, because I can see an argument that newspapers succeed in getting some regulatory protection from innovation to cover 10% of their activity when the other 90% should really be open and contestable. And whether I find out what celebrity has slept with some other celebrity is via this newspaper or a blog or Facebook, it should be fairly irrelevant.
Sure, I think that's a really excellent point. And it's something I've been thinking about how to get it empirically. Of course, you know, quantifying and measuring the value of a story, the contribution of the investigative journalism versus sort of the copycatting is a pretty challenging empirical exercise. But I think it's something that you could do for a sample if you're willing to make some assumptions and, you know, live with some error in your categorizations. So I don't actually know what share is really investigative. I would say, I mean, you can even look over time at changes in Google News ranking, like, you know, in the maybe 5 to 8 years ago, they would very commonly have the first ranked article be a blog that was copying a newspaper and literally copying it. Like the blog was, the New York Times reports blah, and here's a paragraph from the article. And they did actually, you know, adjust their algorithms to demote those things and to promote some of the original sources. Now, that was probably more motivated by a user experience than by thinking about the production of content, because it was a bad user experience to go to these blogs, these unprofessional blogs. But I think that, you know, somehow these services themselves have done some data-driven ways to figure it out. Now, in some cases, it's just hardwiring, like the New York Times should be high, and they're rather than, you know, really looking at the content of the articles. But a lot of these smaller papers don't really have big reporting staffs, and so when we see the people who are getting the referrals, the small outlets that are getting referrals, they often don't seem to have a lot of original content.
Any other question? One over there.
Yes, Augusto Preta, consultant. I'm not an expert of telecommunication, but regarding what Antonio Nicita said, I think the difference between having an authorization and not having an authorization just to write a letter. So I don't know that makes such a big difference in analyzing a relevant market or analyzing the difference between telecommunication and WhatsApp. I mean, so this is just for one point. The second point is also when we talk about aggregator, I mean, I refer to the last point, we just think that they are all the same, no? So you have iTunes, you have Google, you have Facebook, you have Uber, I don't know if, but I think it's quite different. I mean, if you have Netflix, you have to pay. If you have Apple, you have to pay. If you have Google, you have you get from advertising. So even the problem of the copyright is different between Apple and other kind of players. So, I mean, I don't see this a way to better analyze the player in the market, because, I mean, as far as I know, I believe that there is some a relationship between some operator in what everybody calls OTT and what is the traditional player, like, for example, Netflix compared to other pay TV operator, while I see Google and other players as much more different from this. So it's not the same. Just a point. And the last point was about market share. I mean, a market share, when we talk about winner take all, of course, it's an important point, but it cannot be the only way to analyze dominance or analyze the abuse of dominance, because in a market where you have network effect, much more people you get, much more effective you are. So this is, in cases, in the benefit of the consumer. It doesn't discriminate between other operators. I believe that market share cannot be considered the only point to define the market or regulate the market. Thank you.
Antonio.
I totally agree with you on the authorization side of the story. This is a purely administrative one, because in Italy, in order to start the work of the regulators, you should be authorized. So if you are authorized, then you have obligations. If you have obligations, then the regulators could come to you, knocking your doors and say, you have to do something. This is the point on WhatsApp.
Thank you. So any other question? So maybe just to conclude, one last question from from the panel that we started to discuss earlier on is just the point in relation to the Italian competition authority case on Google. And back in 2010, the Italian competition authority investigated the fact that there were complaints because when online editors did not accept to go into or did not want to go into Google online, then they were also they were also restricted by Google not to go on the web search, and so they lost advertising. And so I was interested to understand how your analysis that you explained today would impact the case these days. Thank you.
Sure. So I haven't studied that particular example so carefully, but I think just broadly, internet search is quite impactful on who gets traffic. And so I think you see across the whole ecosystem in every vertical, from news to shopping and reviews and so on, that the threat of having your Google ranking reduced is quite large. And you've seen a lot of companies that have been harmed in various ways, afraid to talk to regulators, afraid to make any public statements, because the algorithms for ranking are non-transparent, and there have often been explicit or implicit threats of retaliation. And so I think, and the retaliation threat is quite substantial because of the market share in search. So, you know, in Europe, you've got 90 to 95% market share of Google. If your information is not findable on Google, that can be death for a company. A news organization may still survive, an online shopping engine may not. And so I think it is quite important when you have, especially in Europe, a dominant firm, you know, dominant, not forget about 90, 95% share firm, has a special responsibility not to take actions that impede competition. And I think, you know, using your power of re-ranking or taking away people's traffic to induce behavior in other markets is something that, you know, competition authorities should be quite concerned about. So in this case, you know, you can have a collection of news outlets that want to negotiate with Google News about what's happening on Google News, but there's this elephant in the room that what's really quantitatively important is search, and if any particular outlet was just demoted a little bit, in search, which would be hard to prove, you could really have a substantial impact on your business. And so the power of these intermediaries is just quite important.